We're here for the presentation of the prize for the young researcher offered by RnB4CULTURE. This award was established in 2021 and recognizes the vibrancy of research in Italian culture and its evolving nature, expressed in a variety of ways, such as innovative uses of technology, originality of approach, contribution to wider questions and trends in the humanities at large. Of course, this is an ISSNAF award. We're here for the symposium for the finalists. And I just want to introduce today by saying a couple of words about our sponsor, our jury, and our candidate. RnB4CULTURE offers software and hardware for cultural use, management of cultural and museum structures, refurbishment of museums, virtualization, and many other cultural content-related technology services. Our jury includes Professor Pamela Ballinger, Fred Cuny Chair in the History of Human Rights at the University of Michigan. Her main research areas are the history of human rights, refugees and displacement, memory, fascism, empire, and decolonization, with particular reference to the Mediterranean area and specifically the Adriatic. She's the author of 2 monographs, History in Exile in 2003, and more recently, The World Refugees Made, Decolonization and the Foundation of Postwar Italy, winner of the American Association for Italian Studies, History, Society, and Politics Book Prize in 2021. Professor Graziella Parati is Chair of Women's, Gender, and Sexuality Studies, and Paul Paganucci Professor of Italian Language and Literature at Dartmouth College. Her major field of research are 20th century Italian culture and literature, post-colonial studies, Italian multiculturalism and migration studies, and eco-criticism. She's the author of 6 monographs, including her latest, Migrant Writers and Urban Spaces, Space in Italy, Proximities and Affect in Literature and Film, published by Paul Grave, and co-editor of at least 7 collective volumes, Diversity, and the latest ones, Diversity and Decolonization in Italian Studies, a special issue of Italian Studies in Southern Africa, and Contemporary Italian Diversity in Critical and Fictional Narratives, published by Fairleigh Dickinson University Press in 2021. Myself, I'm Professor Claudio Fogu. I am the chair of this for this award. I am a professor of Italian Studies at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and I am the author of 2 monographs, The Historic Imaginary, Politics of History in Fascist Italy in 2003, and in 2020, The Fishing Net and the Spider Web, Mediterranean Imaginaries and the Making of Italians. And then Dulcis in Fundo, our finalist, Camilla Authorn, Professor Camilla Authorn, an associate professor in the Department of Sociology at the University of California, Santa Cruz. She is the author of a brand new monograph entitled Contesting Race and Citizenship, Youth Politics in the Black Mediterranean, that was published by Cornell University Press this year and is in the process of being translated, as Camilla just informed us. She's also the co-editor of The Black Mediterranean, Bodies, Borders, and Citizenship, which came out in 2021, and it's a collective effort by a collective editorial collective, which in itself would merit a prize for their work. In 2020, she was named number 20 on a list of 110 Women of the Year by the Corriere della Sera for her work on the Black diaspora in Italy. These are only some of her qualifications. There are many others, but we are obviously here to hear her presentation of her project, Race, Citizenship, and the Politics of Blackness in Italy. And we invite all of you to put your questions after the presentation or even during the presentation in the Q&A. So I welcome you all to this symposium, and I leave the stage to Camilla Author.
Thank you so much for having me here today. And it's such an honor to be presenting my work to such an esteemed panel. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I have some slides. Okay, and can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. So as Dr. Fogu said, my name is Camilla Hawthorne. I'm an associate professor of sociology and critical race and ethnic studies at UC Santa Cruz. I'm also a faculty affiliate of the Science and Justice Research Center and the Legal Studies program. Broadly, I'm a critical human geographer whose work brings together Black European studies, Italian studies, critical human geography, and migration and citizenship studies. As an undergraduate and master's student at Brown University from 2005 to 2010, I studied the history of and policy responses to African immigration to Italy. After taking a 2-year hiatus away from the university, working in international broadcasting and digital media, I returned to academia. And in 2018, I earned my doctorate from UC Berkeley in geography and science and technology studies with a dissertation on Black youth mobilizations against racism in Italy, which became the basis of my monograph. Before I move on to talk about my research, though, I want to say a little bit about how I came to this work. Because my work on race and Blackness in Italy emerges from my own lived experiences. And the way I think through the relationship between my experiences and my research is grounded in feminist practice and research methods. As a self-identified Black Italian, I consciously structure my research in a way that is reflexive, but also attentive to differences of power. And this approach, of course, derives from feminist epistemology. Specifically, that not only are we always knowing from somewhere, but that the spatiality of knowing can be a generative starting point from which to theorize power. My mother is a white Italian woman who grew up in Trescore in provincia di Bergamo, and my father is a Black American who was born in rural Virginia and grew up in Oakland. They met when my father was drafted into the US Army and sent to Italy, and they married in 1976. Several years later, they returned to California, where I was born. Our household was bilingual, and I actually spoke Italian before I spoke English. And since my mother was the youngest of 13 siblings, and there's a sidebar here about fascist pronatalism, I grew up spending every summer and often every winter with her family in Italy. And so this is all to say that my own life has been shaped by a deep connection to diasporic Blackness and diasporic Italianness. And because my white Italian grandfather fought in the Italian colonial wars in Libya, I'm connected to both the transatlantic slave trade and the history of Italian colonialism on the African continent. Over the course of doing research with Black Italian activists, I was struck by the profound resonances between their stories and my own, and their insights helped me understand my family in new ways. But still, it's important to note that our Italian Blacknesses, in the plural, didn't always easily map onto each other. I have the privileges of relatively unfettered transnational mobility that come with an American passport, US citizenship, and an elite US academic institutional affiliation. In addition, I have Italian citizenship thanks to the same descent-based jus sanguinis framework that has simultaneously disenfranchised so many of my Black Italian comrades. Despite the fact that I was born in California and they were born in Italy, I'm an Italian citizen simply because my mother was also born an Italian citizen. Yet another example of the mutual imbrication of race, gender, kinship, and citizenship. And these resonances and dissonances between my experiences of Black Italianness and those of my interlocutors became the basis for a number of collaborative projects that we've developed in Italy, both within and outside the Academy. The core of my work involves ethnographic and archival research on the Black diaspora in Italy, with an emphasis on emergent forms of Black political mobilization. My scholarship maps the geographical and historical specificity of racism in Italy and Southern Europe more broadly, while taking up the question simultaneously of what it means to engage with Italy and the Mediterranean region as a starting point for understanding the history of racism on a global scale, rather than just a bounded and exceptional case. In doing so, I also try to challenge US-centric understandings of racism and race. In doing so, I take up the question of what it means to engage with Italy, not just as a site of bounded comparison with North America, but also as a starting point for a relational and transnationally interconnected theorization of global racisms. In other words, my work asks how our understandings of racism and the politics of Blackness might shift, might be transformed, when we geographically reorient the global history of racial capitalist modernity on the Italian peninsula and the broader Mediterranean region. I argue that this history reveals the inextricability of border fortification, coloniality, and anti-Black racism, and as such, that immigrants' rights and post-colonial struggles must necessarily be a part of the global resistance to racism and resurgent fascism. In 2021, I published the edited volume, The Black Mediterranean, Bodies, Borders, and Citizenship with Palgrave Macmillan. This project emerged from a collaboration called the Black Mediterranean Collective, a transnational and interdisciplinary group of scholars studying racism, colonialism, Blackness, and the politics of migration and citizenship in Italy. The Black Mediterranean considers what a careful attention to anti-Black racism and legacies of Italian colonialism can disclose about the Mediterranean refugee crisis, themes that we found had been largely neglected in popular coverage of the crisis. And this represented the first book to be published in the emerging field of Black Mediterranean studies. I contributed to the volume's collectively written editor's introduction and also wrote the sole authored chapter, L'Italia Meticcia, the Black Mediterranean and the Racial Cartographies of Citizenship. In that chapter, I argued that the Mediterranean Sea continues to serve as a polyvalent referent for drawing and contesting the boundaries of Italianness in relation to Blackness. My new book, Contesting Race and Citizenship, Youth Politics in the Black Mediterranean, which was published by Cornell University Press this summer, attends to the incredible proliferation of Black Italian movements, projects that address the Italian nation state and the wider Black diaspora, the unspoken whiteness of Italian identity, and the interlocking racist violences of Fortress Europe. Although there is extensive research on first-generation immigrants and refugees who traveled from Africa to Italy across the Mediterranean, there is still little scholarship about the experiences of Black people who were born and raised in Italy. So in my book, I focus on the ways that Italians of African descent have become entangled with the process of redefining the legal, racial, cultural, and economic boundaries of Italy, and by extension, of Europe itself. What are the possibilities and limitations of these emergent mobilizations? What new formations of Italianness are possible, and what older ones are resuscitated in efforts to challenge the racial borders of Italy and Europe, to challenge the linking of citizenship to blood and descent? In other words, how are Black Italians actively remaking what it means to be Italian and European today? Contesting Race and Citizenship focuses in on the movement to reform Italian citizenship law and provide a path to citizenship for nearly 1 million children of immigrants who were born or raised in Italy. In the book, I ask why and how Black Italian activists have taken up citizenship in particular as a key terrain of struggle over racism, and what new forms of differentiation and exclusion are emerging in these efforts to reformulate and expand Italian citizenship. So in the book, I think about the possibilities and limits of citizenship, as well as the ways that Black Italians build diasporic communities that actually stretch beyond the boundaries of the Italian nation state altogether. Contesting race and citizenship is based on multi-sided, mixed methods, qualitative research conducted in Italy between 2013 and 2019. This includes in-depth interviews, participant observation, virtual ethnography, media and policy analysis, as well as archival research. My work ultimately demonstrates that in Italy and beyond, citizenship has become the container for a long history of debates about the relationship between race and nation. I argue that Black Italian mobilizations exhume and contest the long buried links between nationalism, racism, and the bureaucratic apparatus of citizenship, deadly articulations that have paved the way for the explosion of far-right populist politics across Italy, Europe, and much the rest of the world. So I'll provide a brief overview of the book before I move on and talk about some of the other work I'm doing. The first chapter of the book really starts by looking at the history of the citizenship reform movement in Italy, how it emerged as a key site of contestation over racial nationalism in Italy, as well as some of the challenges and contradictions that arise in efforts to reformulate and expand Italian citizenship law. The question of who is left behind or who is left out of a vision of a new kind of Italian citizenship. In the second chapter, I turned to what for me was a rather unexpected offshoot of these broader movements, specifically the phenomenon of Black Italian entrepreneurship. So in the second chapter, I conduct extensive research with Black women entrepreneurs in Italy who've developed made in Italy businesses that are focused on hair care, fashion, and cosmetics, and the way that they use these entrepreneurial activities both to form community in Italy, but also to advance claims about the contributions of Black Italians to the Italian economic and social fabric at a time when there's a great deal of hand-wringing about the future and possibility of made in Italy. Okay, I see that I'm running short on time, so I'll talk about the future project. Thank you. So one thing I wanted to say is that I've remained an engaged public scholar in Italy, for example, writing the preface for Future, il domani narrato dalle voci di oggi, which was edited by Ija Bashego, as well as contributing various pieces of Italian language scholarship to a variety of journals and edited volumes. Ensuring that my research on the politics of racism and race in Italy is readily accessible in Italian for academic and non-academic audiences alike is central to my research ethics and praxis. So as Claudio mentioned, I'm under contract with Astarsi Edizioni to publish the Italian translation of Contesting Race and Citizenship. The book will be translated by Marie Moisset, a Haitian-Italian translator. The Black Italian activist Marilena Delli will contribute a preface, and my colleague Dr. Angelica Pezzarini will contribute an afterword. And I'm working on two new book projects. I'm co-editing a text called The Black Geographic, Praxis, Resistance, and Futurity, which is coming out with Duke University Press next year. And this explores Black struggles for liberation across a wide range of historical and geographical terrains, from the Mediterranean and beyond, looking at struggles over urban displacement, environmental degradation, and border fortification. I'm also laying the groundwork for a new book that's tentatively called Black Mediterranean Geographies of Abolition, which explores the connections between Black liberation struggles in the United States that are focused on policing and prisons, and struggles in Italy focused on access to citizenship and the dismantling of deadly border fortification. I've developed the conceptual scaffolding for this project through a series of collaborative writing projects with my longtime collaborator, Angelica Pezzarini, including these pieces that we wrote for Jacobin Italia and Public Books. My goal with this new book is to tell an interconnected global story about anti-racist mobilizations across the Black Mediterranean and Black Atlantic diasporas that are connected both by technologies of displacement and confinement, as well as connected by creative strategies of Black resistance and world building. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Camila. I'm so happy you had all the time. You took so much time, but we are very, very taken by your presentation. So I'd like to ask actually Pamela and then Graziella to make a comment or questions, and then also invite our audience to write in the Q&A if they have any question.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And congratulations, Camila. And it's such a pleasure to be here and also to hear about the different directions in which your work is going. I'm really excited for these forthcoming projects and publications, as I know the community of scholars that we are engaged with is. So I have a question that comes out of your presentation. You had, and I think is sort of a central question in your book, Contesting Race and Citizenship. And you asked how Black Italian activists are remaking what it means to be Italian and European today. And of course, books and projects have long geneses. And so I wondered if you could say how your answer to that question perhaps changed over the arc of time from when you began your research, finished your dissertation, and published this book. Maybe even the question itself was reframed. And I'm thinking, of course, about momentous political changes in the world, but also changes in things like information technologies, which you are a student of as well, that enable forms of activism as well as forms of populism and so on. So if you could just tell us a bit about, in a sense, how the context around your project changed and how you have responded to that.
Absolutely. That's a wonderful question. And I appreciate those processual questions. So my own thinking about citizenship has been continuously complexified by the ethnographic research that I've done in Italy. And at the same time, I've noticed that the way that activists I work with, the way they're thinking about citizenship has also shifted dramatically. And that's an arc that I try to trace over the course of my book. So there was a moment in 2015, 2016 when the citizenship reform movement really came to a head. And at the same time, the Mediterranean refugee crisis was raging. And there were these really complicated conversations happening among activists about the extent to which they could link their struggles for citizenship to the violence that was being enacted against refugees in the Mediterranean. And because of the political context in Italy, where Black Italian activists mobilizing for citizenship constantly were being told that they were foreigners and not Italian, it became politically infeasible for them to even publicly articulate those connections. Right? Because if the moment that they said that there was a connection to the violence against refugees, they would be painted as outsiders, when the whole point of this movement was to show that they're Italians. But many people began to raise questions about this, right? To say, you know, it seems unfair that we have to throw refugees under the bus, that we effectively have to marginalize the generation of our parents in order to mobilize for inclusion within the Italian project. And I think there was a moment of great disillusionment in 2017 when that first major citizenship reform bill was defeated and activists were really abandoned by the PD. And that's the moment when I began to see kind of more broadly these more capacious ways of thinking about citizenship, right? Where citizenship was no longer the primary goal, but really a tool, a stepping stone, but with kind of broader visions of what it means to engage in kind of Black solidarity against racial capitalism. And I think we really saw that in action in the summer of 2020 with the large Black Lives Matter protests in Italy, where many Black activists were saying that to make Black Lives Matter in Italy means, yes, access to citizenship, but it also means abolishing Frontex. It also means addressing the labor exploitation of African migrant laborers working in the agricultural sector. And so I think that there's been a really significant shift in the way that activists think about their relationship to Italianness and to Italian citizenship.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I think it is my turn to ask a question. First of all, thank you for your presentation. It was not only incredibly interesting, but I really admire your rhetoric, and the way you express your ideas is really stellar. I see in your work as the future of the studies of migration, citizenship, race issues, and also connected to also gender and sexuality and feminism. So your work is really the future of all of this research is going to be at the center of it. Of course, I am extremely curious about your future work. So I would like you to spend a little bit of time to talk a little bit more about the geographies of abolition. And I'll stop here. So there are 5 minutes. Thank you.
So for me, something that has this framework of the Black Mediterranean has been very transformative for me. In part, I go and I sort of think about the Black Mediterranean in part in relation to the work of Cedric Robinson, who's sort of famous for popularizing the term racial capitalism, in part because Cedric Robinson makes this argument that usually we talk about the origins of racial capitalism as emerging through the transatlantic slave trade, but he actually goes back much further and says that the groundwork was really being laid in the context of Mediterranean agricultural production, the maritime republics of Italy, right, mercantile capitalism that helped to fund Iberian voyages of discovery. And so for me, that was really transformative in terms of thinking about how to more explicitly link this history of kind of North American Blackness and Black struggles, which are very much rooted in the transatlantic slave trade. And these Black Mediterranean histories, which as we think about them now, the experiences of most Black Italians living in Italy today, which are not explicitly tied to the history of slavery. As someone who works in between Italian studies and Black studies, what I've always struggled with is the fact that Black studies tends to uncritically take for granted an orientation on North American histories. And then a lot of the terminology and conceptual frameworks start to lose purchase when we move to the Black Mediterranean, where we're talking about histories of migration, post-colonial migration. But thinking about interconnected histories in this way, kind of using Cedric Robinson as a jumping off point, has given me a way to think about what it means to connect these struggles that are oriented on the Black Atlantic and these struggles that are oriented on the Black Mediterranean without papering over these really important historical differences. Another key point of reference for me is really emerging from the work of scholars like Angela Davis, who have made the argument that a lot of the technologies and corporations and strategies that undergird mass incarceration and policing in the United States are the same kinds of technologies and practices that are used to fortify the Mediterranean border. So even in terms of the kind of global circulation of technologies of confinement, there are also these similarities and parallels that can be the basis of solidarity. So in the new book, I'm interested in sort of doing some theoretical mapping, right? Really thinking about how we can put the Black Mediterranean and the Black Atlantic into dialogue to overcome this sort of division between the two, but to then also think about what these avenues for solidarity and collaboration might look like in the present.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Camila, thank you so much, Camila. I really, I know we only have two minutes, so I actually don't want to ask a question. I want to just praise not only your work like Graciela and Pamela have done, but also the initiative of the collective of the Black Mediterranean. And just we could talk a lot about that, but I just want to say that even in terms of your scholarly practice and how you go about doing research and recognizing each other's research, it seems to me like a wonderful way to sort of emphasize the relationality and collectivity of this effort. And so I praise you also for that. And with that, I really don't want to do more than just thank you and thank everybody else. We know we have a hard stop in 1 minute, so we stop in 30 seconds and I'll leave you maybe the last word.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate your questions. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to my presentation. It's really an honor. All of your work I admire so much and has influenced me. So yes, thank you. Thank you so much. And I hope you have a wonderful day.
Okay, well, this concludes our symposium. I thank Camilla, I thank very much Pamela and Graziella, and I thank Cinzia and Enrica for structuring our symposium, and see you soon.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Ciao,
Thank
ciao,
you.
ciao.
Thanks.